All right, this morning we are continuing in our study of book overviews. So we're back on book overviews. I'm very excited about that. And we are going to take this section of the prophets, and I'm going to do an introduction today to this section because it needs it. And so this is going to be called Introduction to the Prophets. Thank you so much for joining us. Those of you who are joining online, I wanted to just do a little housekeeping for a moment and remind you of something. And that is that when you make a comment right now, when it's live on YouTube, if you make a comment on that or Facebook, it won't be a forever comment. So just remember that. I don't know why they do it that way, but on the Facebook side, which most of our viewers have gone to YouTube Live, which I think is probably better. But our Facebook side, that video gets deleted altogether. On the YouTube side, I believe, if I'm understanding this correctly, if you make a comment right now while it's live, by the time it gets uploaded in the YouTube server, all the comments are deleted, and then after that, just the ones that are done after it gets published, I think is the wording, those stay forever. So I wanted to say that because I believe it was last week or possibly the week before, somebody gave me a comment that was like basically saying I didn't answer a question, and they were disappointed in me and that kind of thing. So if you have a comment to correct me, please, or if it's, let me just say this. Okay, if you have a comment that is directly to me, please make sure that you don't do it during a live because I won't see it. Okay, so if you're saying, Ken, please address this, or how dare you, or I disagree, or whatever the case is, I won't see it if it's done live. So please be aware of that. Please wait until maybe later this afternoon or later when the YouTube video is up. So a little housekeeping there. Go ahead. Thank you. Or send an email, askbible4.family@gmail, or askbible4family@gmail.com, or 401-47-BIBLE. You can text that anytime that gets to me. You can leave a nice long voicemail and feel better about getting all your emotions out on a voicemail. So that would be fun too. All right. So, but sincerely, please get a hold of me a different way. Don't leave a message on a live because I won't receive it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for all your support. And we certainly appreciate it. We're jumping into the intro to the prophets, and I am so excited to have this intro today because I'm going to, if you can engage your mind, actually both hours today, this is one of those things where I try to, in fact, we got a comment just before we started saying, please, maybe somebody can't follow if you're using long words. I am so sorry if that happens. I don't intend to do that. I do know that the nature of our ministry is a little bit more academic. I get that. That's just how God made me. I try very diligently to try and make it to where it's very understandable. But I do want to ask you, as the viewer, as the person sitting there, that you have a responsibility as well. And that is that ask the Lord to block your mind, to control your mind, to calm your mind, to keep you from all the tasks that are going on before, after, during service, and dedicate this time to the Lord. I will tell you that I will, with the Lord's help, by His grace, I will always prepare to bring you something that hopefully will be something you can chew on, that will be an encouragement. I always try to find a balance between information and encouraging, challenging and encouraging. So that's my side. But I would like for you to dedicate your mind and your heart to the Lord and say, Lord, this is information. This isn't milk. We're not doing milk in our ministry. Milk is great. I'm not opposed. And a lot of stuff we do is milk. But also, I'm not up here giving a lot of illustrations and fun stories from my childhood and little poems. And I can do that. I did that for some time. But I feel the Lord has called me to feed His sheep. That's what He says. So we're going to go over the Word of God. But that will require you to dedicate your mind, and you're the other half of that equation. So in the same way, you should hold me accountable that I need to be prepared for Sunday morning and that you're going to know Ken was in the Word this week. In the same way, the Lord, I think, is holding you accountable for the fact that you need to be an active listener. Is that fair? So there's a partnership there, okay? But having said that, this morning is one of those that you will be so blessed by if you can engage your mind, because I think there will be some new information this morning. Remember this chart? 512, 5512. 512, 5512. The Pentateuch, history, poetry, and wisdom. Major prophets, minor prophets. Why are they called major and minor? Just because of length. It's not because of importance. It's because of length. They just have longer books. And so we are starting in this, after this second red line right here, we're starting in this section called the prophets. I think the prophets are so misunderstood, and this is exactly why we took the time on understanding the remnant. Because if you get the concept of understanding the remnant, then you'll understand that the majority of what these guys are saying is, hey, make sure you're attached to the tree. That's their major communication. Get attached to the tree. Now that makes sense to you. Don't just be connected by bloodline, be connected by covenant. So that's their major thing. They really all, you could say all of their prophecies have to do with basically a couple things. First of all, in the case of Isaiah and some of the earlier prophets, the Assyrian captivity, 721 BC. Secondly, the Babylonian captivity, 586 BC. And thirdly, a coming Messiah. Other than that, they are warning about things like Deuteronomy 28, the stipulations of the covenant. Make sure you're not in the negative part of that getting the curses from God. And hey, there's a captivity coming, whether it's Assyrian or Babylonian, and there's a coming king, coming Messiah. If you just kind of understand that's what they're doing, then you'll be better off. All of their prophecies are either going to be fulfilled in Christ or not fulfilled at all because the people didn't meet the conditions of the covenant. And so you can categorize them very easily by what's going on here. I have this first line here just as a way of quick recap. If you remember, from Genesis to Esther, by and large, is chronological. So if you want to know your Old Testament is Genesis through Esther. Esther's the end of the story. You said, wait a second, I thought Malachi was the end of the story. It is. Malachi and Esther are like same time period. So you have people say, oh, I just really want a chronological Bible. Don't do that. Your Bible's already chronological. Genesis through Ezra, for the most part, with some recap in Chronicles, for the most part, is chronological. Now, when we get to this, Job through a Song of Solomon, it's the poetic books. Now, what you can say, just like we use the book of Acts, when you read Acts and you're reading a story in Acts, or let me reverse that. When you're reading the book of Philippians, you should be able to ask yourself, what part of Acts does Philippians fit into? Because Acts is a timeline that goes from the beginning, where it picks up at the ascension of Christ to the end of the Gospels, from the ascension of Christ, and it doesn't record the death of Paul, but it pretty much goes to the end of Paul's life. Acts 1 through 28. So when you're reading anything from Paul, you should ask yourself, where in Acts does this fit? Acts is like the whole timeline. Everything else is supplemental. Kind of like a hyperlink. A hyperlink. When I click on 1 Samuel as a hyperlink, I'll get the Psalms. It comes out of that time period because David's writing that. Psalm and some. Does that make sense? So we could fit all of these somewhere into there. And same with these as well. Introduction to the prophets. I'm going to cover 4 questions in the next few minutes here. The first 3 I will somewhat go quickly over because I really want to spend time on number 4. Here's the 4 questions. What is a prophet? What did he do? What's his job? Secondly, did other nations besides Israel have prophets? Third, how was a prophet chosen? And then fourth, and this is the big one I really want you to get because this is the one I misunderstood for so many years that I want to pass on to you this morning. How were the prophecies in the Old Testament applied in the New Testament? And that's really what I want to focus on this morning. So let's get through the first 3 here. First of all, what is a prophet? What did he do? Well, a prophet may be simply defined as a spokesman. It's one of the definitions for a prophet. He's a spokesman. Now, in the case of the prophets of Israel, they were spokesmen from the Lord with a divine message. They were spokesmen saying that they were representing the Lord. But the word itself just simply means spokesman. Also, a prophet mainly reminded the people about the covenant stipulations. I already mentioned this a little bit. They mainly were attorneys. They mainly reminded the people of the legal document of the contract of the covenant. Deuteronomy 28 is an example, a very classic example. First 14 verses or so are all the blessings, and the remaining 50 or 60 are all the curses. It's like Deuteronomy 28. They're just reminding them, bringing them back. Don't forget, don't forget, don't forget. That was their job, as they were divine attorneys. Think of it that way. They're making sure you have all the legal documents so that you don't get judged and sentenced. They were warning about impending judgment if they became broken off branches. See, I can use that terminology with you now. Does that make sense? Don't be a broken off branch. They also prophesied about God's future faithfulness. In other words, returning to their land after a captivity in the cases of Ezekiel 36 and 37, and the coming Messiah. They would prophesy about the coming Messiah. You can read about that in Isaiah chapter 6. I would take the time to look at those, but if you would like to look at those on your own later, for the sake of time, I'm not going to turn there this morning. But God would always call a prophet. We'll look at that in a little bit here. I will slow down at that part. And lastly, a prophet is often used, and this is a really important point here, a prophet often used creative language to communicate their message. So these specific people from God called prophets, his spokesmen, that were called by him, they would often employ a creative style of language that we call prophetic language. That makes sense. They're a prophet, so prophetic language. This kind of language is filled with tons of symbolisms and various figures of speech, like metaphors or synecdoches or similes. And all of these things are used in the bag of tools of a prophet. Because remember, a prophet's tool bag is his mouth. He's a word guy. He's speaking. Sometimes the Lord would have them do some awfully funny things to illustrate, like, cut your beard in 3 parts and lay one part over here and burn this part and put this part in the wind. And, you're like, what? Or one person, lay on your one side for this long and then flip over and lay on this side. And so that, people come out to the marketplace and go, what's the old prophet doing today? Oh, he's still on his left side? Well, what's that supposed to mean? I don't know. We'll see what he's doing tomorrow, It was like the slowest form of information of the day. Everybody was on the same page looking at the prophet do these bizarre things, They'd communicate in different ways. But I want to make sure you don't miss this point here, that they communicated in these really, really exaggerated, symbolic ways that we call prophetic language. This is how the book of Revelation is written. Revelation, I've said this for years now, Revelation essentially has no new information in it at all. Revelation is pointing backwards at the rest of the Bible and drawing from imagery from the rest of the Bible. Once you get that, it's so easy to understand, because all you have to do then is see where is it quoting from and then understand where it's quoting from. And that's the message that John's trying to convey at that time. But this prophetic message is things like the sun will go out and not give its light anymore. The stars will fall from heaven. Fire and brimstone from the sky, or the smoke of the nostrils of God, the earth opening up, and things like this. These are highly symbolic, another figure of speech is hyperbole. The hyperbole is used a lot in these, a deliberate exaggeration made for emphasis. I like to call it comic book language. It's the same thing. If you were to see, this is the illustration I always use, so sorry if you've heard it before, but I don't have very much new information here. If you were to see this morning an elephant, a big elephant carrying a big gun, right? And this elephant carrying a big gun had a big red jacket on, and as the comic panned away, you see this elephant trying to keep his gun like this with a big red jacket, and you see then down here in the rest of the comic, as you pan away, there's a donkey, and he's wearing a blue jacket, and he's reaching for the gun. Do you know what that means? Now, everyone in here is an American. Some people watch us across the pond, as we say, and a few people in South Africa, I believe. So maybe they wouldn't catch that. But if you live in America or you know American politics, you know exactly what that means. What, we're obsessed with elephants and donkeys? No. Those two represent our political system of the GOP, the grand old party. Republicans are the elephants, and therefore Second Amendment rights. They want to have the right to bear arms and protect yourself against tyranny. And then the donkey represents the Democratic Party, who many times want gun control. And so that comic would make sense. Now that would be an example of how the prophet spoke. But until you understand the cultural context, it just becomes a very confusing story. And so what a lot of pastors do when they read Revelation is they say, oh, the prophecy is about an elephant and a donkey, you see? And that's called reading in a wooden or literal sense of the text. It's not taking the text as it was meant to be taken. And so they're waiting for the sun to actually go out, a star to actually fall from the sky. And they say, oh, this is a meteor or a comet, right? So they're waiting for the Mount of Olives to actually be split by tectonic activity. They're missing the cultural prophetic language. The second question, did the other nations besides Israel have a prophet? Actually, yes, they did. But here's the giant difference. They did, but often the king would pick a prophet to tell him what he wanted to hear. So it was more like a checklist. Like, I'm a king. Do I have all my assistants in place? Okay, I've got an administrative assistant. I've got, somebody to look after the food. I've got somebody to look after, the military. I've got somebody to look after all my, judicial system. And do I have a prophet in place? Oh, let's appoint this person prophet. They'll interview him. Are you going to be a good prophet? Let me interview you. Yes, king, I'll be a great prophet. Okay, we'll see how you do. And the prophet would go to the king and say, oh, king, the prophecy is. And if it was favorable towards the king, then the prophet would be in good graces and he could stay. If the prophet gave him bad information, then off with his head. Now, second bullet point, this made Israel unique. Why? Because the prophets of Israel corrected the kings. They spoke for God. So Israel was super unique in this sense, and this is why we understand Israel, especially prior to Solomon, as being a theistic, run theistically instead of a monarchy. They were a theocracy, God run. But their downfall was they wanted a human king and got Saul. Thirdly, how was a prophet chosen? Well, this is interesting. It's so important you know this, because there's a check and balance system in Israel through God. We believe in check and balance systems here in America. We believe that there are three distinct branches of government. They're not to impede on each other. And what do you call it if somebody from the executive branch steps over and they become more active in the judicial branch? We would call that tyranny. That's what a king does. And so our country was set up in a unique way where we have three equal branches of government: judicial, legislative, executive. And these three equal branches of government are not to step on each other. I heard, this is just something I just thought of. I heard recently somebody said something to Marco Rubio, and it was from the judicial side. And he said, I'm sorry, you're not to tell an executive branch what to do. And he really stood firm because it was two different branches of government. And he was right. And this is why as a constitutional conservative myself, I am against activist judges. Their job is to stay in the judicial lane. I don't need a judge to go over to the executive branch. I don't need them to reinterpret the Constitution or enter their politics into the judicial branch. No, I need them to not legislate. I need them to just be in the judicial branch. Make sense? Israel's much the same way: prophet, priest, and king. And those three were supposed to be very, very different. And if anybody dared cross one of those, like Uzziah did, and got leprosy and fell over, don't cross those three. You're the king. Stay in your king branch. Now, these three unique offices were all done differently. Of course, we understand the priest was from the tribe of Levi and would be a very specific male from that tribe, and only one high priest. But a prophet was different. A prophet was like anybody. How were they chosen? Well, God alone chose his prophets, and they'd have all sorts of backgrounds, like Amos. He was a shepherd from the hills of Tekoa. He's just random, just out there. And the Lord says, Amos, what? And the Lord, and this is how we always say it. I have it even here. And the word of the Lord came to ... And the word of the Lord came, and he chose that prophet. Okay, so all different backgrounds, all different experiences. You can read Isaiah 6 or Jeremiah 1. 4 through 10. When I create this, I envision we're actually have time to read all these. Isn't that a hoot? We're not even close. Anyway, I get so optimistic. But I do want to show you this one. If you would turn to Deuteronomy chapter 18, because there's rules in place to be able to identify a false prophet. So you say, wait a second. If anybody's a prophet, couldn't, the guy down the road stand up and say, I am a prophet of God? Yes, they could, and they did. And by the way, people still do that today. Okay, some people are even bold enough to put the word prophet in their name. So let me give you a couple of the rules that the Bible gave you. I'm not going to read the first part, but I wanted you to have this reference because Moses here is talking about Jesus. It says a prophet's going to be raised up from among you. Stephen quotes this in Acts 7, said, here's that prophet, it's Jesus. Acts 3:23 is quoting this as well. If you don't listen to the prophet, your soul will be destroyed. It's a very, very important passage here. But let me go ahead and read starting in verse number 19. And it shall be that whoever will not hear my words, which he speaks in my name, I will require it of him. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. How will we know, Lord? 21. If you say in your heart, how shall we know that the word of the Lord... let me say it again. If you say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? Here's the answer. You can remember this for bad theology today too. Deuteronomy 18:22. When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You shall not be afraid of him. He's not connected to the Lord. The Bible would call that a false prophet. A false prophet. By the way, I'll just say this quickly. I'd love to do maybe a whole session on just what I'm about to tell you, but it was just too good to not tell you. You know when the Bible says to, in the 10 Commandments, is it 3 or 4, to not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain? We're all familiar with that. Is that 3 or 4? Do you mean to have it memorized? Let's think about that for a second. That we've heard our whole lives that means don't curse. If somebody says, "Oh my God," and they say it in a way that's not reverent, we say, "You just took the name of the Lord your God in vain," right? That's how I've always kind of heard it. That's not what it's talking about. No, I don't think that's good to do. I think you're foolish to use his name in any way that's less than it deserves to be used. But did you know that Sarah took my name? Just to get your mind down what this means. Sarah took my name. And she didn't take it in vain. In other words, she didn't take it in an empty way. What was it? 3rd commandment. She didn't take it in an empty way. She took it in a way where it changed her whole life. Her last name is Mady now, and she identifies as a Mady. In fact, we even live together. We do life together, okay? We do all these things in life together, and we are approaching life with one team. She didn't take my name. Now, if she took my last name but never moved in with me, if she took my last name but identified with her former lifestyle and never incorporated her life with me, that would be taking my name in an empty way. You see, but we're not to take the name of the Lord in vain. In other words, don't you dare say you're a Christian and not truly represent him. That's taking the name of the Lord in vain. So don't take it as an authoritative way. Don't take it and say, I'm with him, and then not act like you're with him. So that's what it means. But anyway, so if these people are taking the name of the Lord, but they're not following through with it, they're a false prophet. All right. And now that we have 5 or 6 minutes left, here's the part I wanted to get to. 4th question. How were the prophecies in the Old Testament applied to the New Testament? I worded that in a very specific way. And this isn't, what I'm about to show you is not difficult. This is not a difficult concept, but it might be a new concept for many of you. Okay, so now please wrap your head around. I'm going to start over again. Please wrap your head around this because I do think this will be life-changing for you. How were the prophecies in the Old Testament, so when a prophecy was made in the Old Testament, how are they applied in the New Testament is the question. Here we go. Old Testament prophets, many times, this isn't always, but I'm giving you many times, they prophesied about one event, And then after that one event happened and was fulfilled in their day, the New Testament writers would apply it to Christ. This is not, as it's many times called, a double fulfillment. So important you get what I'm saying right now. It's not a double fulfillment, because if there's a double fulfillment, there could be a triple fulfillment. And if there's a double fulfillment, who's to say there can't be another Jesus born in another Bethlehem? Why can't it just keep happening? There are no double fulfillments, and I've changed the way that I teach this. I may have said something different 3 or 4 years ago. I will say this: there are no double fulfillments in the Bible. What there are immediate fulfillments, which becomes a type of a later thing applied to something else. Let me give you an example. Hosea 11:1. Hosea is writing, and he says, when Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt I called my son. Okay, Hosea. Okay, let me ask you this question. In Hosea 11:1, we're talking about Israel having a relationship with a parental relationship, father, son. I loved him out of Egypt. This is clearly talking about the story of Moses and the Exodus. So let me ask you a question. Is this even prophecy? Is that a prophetic statement? No. Hosea is looking backwards. Hosea is looking backwards, and he's saying a relationship status. This is like a father and son relationship. By the way, there's a reason why. Well, I just wrote about a 20-page paper on Hosea 11 a little while ago. And there's a reason why he uses a father-son relationship, because it's not, I have no covenant with Drew. I love him out of a relationship. I have a covenant with Sarah, but what he's saying is, before the covenant was even made, I loved you because I wanted to. Okay, but I just ask you a question. Is that prophecy? There's no prophetic statement in verse 1 at all. But now in Matthew chapter 2, when Matthew is writing 30 years after Jesus was ascended, he says, and there was until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, out of Egypt I've called my son. Now he's quoting Hosea 11 and saying, so that it might be fulfilled. What are you talking about, Matthew? This isn't even a prophecy. And it's certainly not a prophecy about Christ. It's a prophecy about Israel being called a son, looking backwards out of the Exodus. But when Matthew is writing in his biography about Jesus, please get this. It'll help you so much. When Matthew is writing in his biography about Jesus, he notices something. That in the story of Jesus, he also goes down to Egypt to escape Herod. And after Herod dies, Jesus comes back. And Matthew goes, aha! That's similar to what happened to Israel in Egypt, escaping the famine and then coming out of the bondage of Egypt through Moses. And he's saying, now it's been fulfilled. What's been fulfilled? The typology has been fulfilled. It's the type and antitype. It's the shadow and the body. So he is now the question is this: what gives him the right to apply that to Jesus? You follow me? What gives him the right to do that? I'll answer that in a moment. Here's another one. Isaiah 7:14. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Who's he talking to? Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son. You shall call his name Emmanuel. I could ask anybody in the room and say, who's that talking about? And I know all of us would have the same answer. The answer we'd all say is Jesus. The answer is, actually, that's not talking about Jesus at all. The Lord's having a conversation with Ahaz. And he says to Ahaz, ask of a sign. As high as the heavens, low as the earth, ask for a sign. Anything you want. Ahaz says, oh, I know better than to tempt the Lord my God. He's talking to the Lord, who told him to ask for a sign. And he says, I'll just give you a sign. How about that? And he says, therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. If you're not going to ask for one, Ahaz, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Who's he talking? Who's the Lord talking about through Isaiah? He's talking about Isaiah's wife. And in chapter 8 of Isaiah, you can see his son was born, and he refers to him at the end of verse number 10 as God is with us. Now his name is something else, and I dare not try out of memory to say it, but I will look it up for you. But his name is chapter 8, verse 3, Maher Shalel Hashbaz. And he refers to him as God with us in verse 10. That prophecy then is talking about some immediate things being done. That's what it's talking about. Now the word virgin here can talk about a young woman who's of marriageable age, who's never known a man. So this is their first child, apparently. But now, in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 22, so all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, saying, behold, the virgin with child will bear a son. They'll call his name Emmanuel, which is translated God with us. Was this about Jesus? No, it's about Isaiah's son. But when Matthew is writing and he sees what happens with the Virgin Mary, he goes, there's the antitype to the type. Do you see? Now, what gives Matthew the right to apply that to Jesus? All right. If you get this, it's worth the price of admission. Please understand this. Because in Luke chapter 24, then he said to them, Jesus is talking to his disciples, these are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all, please get it, that all things must be fulfilled, which were written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms. There's all three categories of the Old Testament concerning me. So Jesus said, all of that is to tell you about me. Now, this is the kicker. Please get it. Luke 24:45. Write it down. Put a big star by it. Put a big arrow by it. Put it in your back pocket. This is a key verse for you to know. And he, that is Jesus, opened their understanding, that is the apostles, that they might comprehend the scriptures. So when Jesus, before his ascension in Acts 1, he supernaturally opened the eyes of the apostles to be able to write the New Testament in a way that is a Christian should take it. They are going to give divine commentary on the Old Testament. They are going to show you Jesus in the Old Testament. This is why, what I'm telling you right now, this is why, if you were to ever debate a rabbi, you're talking past each other. A rabbi could take the Old Testament and say, you're so foolish, this is talking about this. And they're right. Except for one thing, they missed the Messiah coming. And when Jesus came, he opened the eyes of the apostles and showed them it was all about him. Now there's other things like him being born in Bethlehem that I'm not touching that are about Jesus. I understand. Isaiah 53, about Jesus. I'm not saying it's all like this, but what I am saying is understand the way this is written. The prophets were writing primarily about things close to them. In fact, I'll go out on a limb and say this. If there are any prophecies in the Old Testament about Christ's second coming, I could debate that they're not. So there's prophecies about his first coming, but I think that's one of those things that Jesus revealed about him leaving and coming again. Remember in Matthew 24, his disciples were not aware of his first leaving, let alone his second coming. It was a foreign concept to them. So, anyways, I hope that makes sense to you. So when we read the New Testament, we're reading all the Gospels, Acts, all the Pauline documents. You say, well, how is that authoritative? And by the way, how did we pick these books? How did Hebrews get in? We don't even know who wrote it. Here's how the canon, the group of books was decided. They have to be connected to an apostle because of this concept. We believe in apostolic authority, not in the sense the Catholic Church does. They believe the apostolic authority kept going through the line of the popes. We see it, I see it, as that those 12 were given a special understanding of the scriptures to give us the key to understanding what the Old Testament is about. And so we have our Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, our Greco-Roman biographies are connected to apostles. If they weren't written by apostles, they were written by an eyewitness of an apostle, like Luke, for example. Hebrews, we're not sure, but the author of Hebrews directly attributes all of the information to an apostle and to the apostles. So we accept it based on the eyewitness of an apostle. So it has to be connected to that. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but I wanted you to understand that truth before we move on. In next hour at 10:15, we'll start in Genesis 49, the judgment seat of Jacob. And then next week, Lord willing, in this hour, we'll start in the book of Isaiah as our book overview. Okay, a lot of information. I hope it was a blessing to you, and we'll see you, Lord willing, in about 25 minutes or so. Okay, 20 minutes. All right.